Hello, and welcome to Radical Engagements, a product of Varn. And today we continue our series that began and nailing it down, our Varn solo. I'm not sure how I branded it back then, but we're clarifying all that now with Byung-Chul Han's Disappearance of Ritual. We're going to be looking at parts of the preliminary remarks and chapter 1, the compulsion of production, because it actually clarifies some points that I brought up in chapter 2 the last time. When I went back and looked at what I wanted to cover, I realized I needed to cover the first chapter first, but I didn't. So I'm now going to do that. All right. Preliminary remarks. The present essay is not animated by a desire to return to ritual. Whether rituals serve as a background against which our present times may be seen to stand out more clearly. Avoiding nostalgia, I sketch a genealogy of their disappearance, a disappearance which, however, I do not interpret as an emancipatory process. Along the way, the pathologies of the present day will all become visible, most of all the erosion of community. At the same time, I offer reflections on different forms of life that might be able to free our society from its collective narcissism. Now, we can see here that Byung-Chul Han's concerns actually mirror the concerns of Christopher Lasch, although he roots it more deeply than Lasch does, actually. And in some ways, it's a communicative economy thing for Byung-Chul Han, as opposed to it being an expression of the organization of capitalism as it is for Lasch, and manifest through psychoanalytic identification. We'll get into that because it's different here, but they do rhyme, and it's important to note that. Anyway, I'm going to be skipping around a little bit in the first chapter, but I'm going to begin at the first paragraph. Rituals are symbolic acts. They represent and pass on the values and orders on which common community is based. They bring forth a community without communication today. However, communication without community prevails. Rituals are constituted by symbolic perception. Symbol, Greek symbolon, originally referred to the sign of recognition between guest friends, Theresia hospitalis. One guest friend broke a clay tablet in two, kept one half for himself and gave the other half to the other as a sign of guest friendship. Thus, the symbol serves a purpose of recognition. We're skipping the long quote. Symbolic perception as recognition is a perception of the permanent. The world is shorn of its contingency and acquires durability. Today, the world is symbol poor. Data and information do not possess symbolic force, and so do not allow for recognition. That's an interesting assertion. So he's using a more archaic form of the word symbol here, and we need to understand that. Like, symbol is not just symbolic representation, because data and information are represented symbolically in the basic sense, as in, like, we have to have some sign that corresponds to some signified or some complex that signifies of family resemblances of which there to be communication. This has a bigger import than that. These images and metaphors, which found meaning in community and stabilized life, are lost in symbolic emptiness. The experience of duration diminishes and contingency dramatically proliferates. We define rituals as symbolic techniques of making oneself at home with the world. I find this definition really broad. This is me talking. And I will admit, as much as I love Byung-Chul Han, this is a kind of expansive philosophizing or reflection, and maybe theorizing in the Aristotelian sense, that I find a little bit frustrating, because he's redefining terms in broad ways that are kind of slippery. But I do find it useful. They transform being in the world into being at home. They turn the world into a reliable place. One thinks about the Southern writer Harry Crews, who once wrote in one of his books, "Rituals keep us safe." Right? And he was writing about Southern culture and Southern life in, the 20th century, but I think he has a point. And that they establish a ground reference and establish a community understanding of that ground reference. Now, it may be projected upon. We don't know what anyone's subjective, experience is, but there is a way in which it seems to order the world in a symbolic process, in a way that data and information by themselves do not, at least psychologically. Now, I think a lot of this is actually conceptually slippery, and there's ways in which data does do that and merges in patterns, and they become like symbols. And pareidolia. It's always when I'm reading Byung-Chul Han is when I can't pronounce things. Pareidolia, which is the finding patterns in meaningless occurrences and attributing meaning to them, are like, for example, if you see a face in the clouds, that's pareidolia. But also when you attribute meaning to otherwise insignificant artistic pattern, that can take on a personally symbolic meaning, but it can't be ritual because it's not symbolic to anyone else but you. It's kind of a private symbol. And we all know from our Wittgenstein, you can't have a private language, but you probably can have a private symbol. All right. They are to time what a home is to space. They render time habitable. They make it accessible like a house. They structure time, furnish it. In his novel, Cited, Antine de Saint-Exupéry describes rituals as a temporal technique as making oneself at home with the world. So you see here that Byung-Chul Han is not just pulling his definition from nowhere, right? And I'm going to read this quote. This is from Citadel. I don't know. It's French. I'm going to butcher anything French. I've never known how to say anything in French correctly if I wasn't taught by some French speaker directly. I apologize, French speakers. Antonine de Saint-Exupéry. Anyway. And our immemorial rights are in time, capitalized, what the dwelling is in space, capitalized. For it is well that the year should not seem to wear us away and dispense us like a handful of sand, whether they should fulfill us. It is to meet that time, capitalized, should be a building up. Thus I go from one feast to another, from anniversary to anniversary, from harvest tide to harvest tide, as, when a child, I made my way from the hall of council to the restroom within my father's palace, where every footstep had a meaning. End of quote. Byung-Chul Han starts here. Today, time lacks a solid structure. It is not a house, but an erratic stream. It disintegrates into mere sequence, a point-like presence. It rushes off. There's nothing to provide time any halt. That's what it is in German. Time that rushes off is not habitable. And I think that's a pun in German, which is why the translator put the German there. Rituals stabilize life. To paraphrase Anton Saint-Exupéry, we must say rituals are in life what things are in space. But for Hannah Arendt, it is the durability of things that gives them their relative independence from men. They have the function of stabilizing human life. Their objectivity lies in the fact that men, their ever-changing nature notwithstanding, can retrieve their sameness, that it is their identity, by being related to the same chair and the same table. And that is from what work by Arendt? I actually don't know that off the top of my head. The Human Condition, which I have read, but I don't remember that passage. Anyway, back into the book. In life, these things serve as stabilizing resting points. Rituals serve the same purpose. Through their self-sameness, their repetition, they stabilize life. As a side note, I do experience that. I have done many rituals. Like, I still find myself doing certain religious rituals that I no longer believe in because they give a certain semblance of stability, almost like stimming, the way one would if one was dealing with an autistic disturbance, or the way one can zone out when one is experiencing some kind of trigger that brings up a trauma. These things are sometimes controlled by symbolic means, and we can do that with repetition. And particularly if the repetition has community meaning, that repetition can seem meaningful and ordered and gives us like clear phases of life. We have approximations of rituals now, but pure ritual is probably a lot less. I don't know that we are completely without ritual, though. I think that's a question I'm going to have to deal with as we go through this. In life, this is Byung-Chul Han again. Things serve as stabilizing resting points. Rituals serve the same purpose. Through their self-sameness, the repetition, they stabilize life. They make life last. Haltbar in German. Or maybe hold together, hold same. I don't know how. My German speakers, while I do have a pretty good grasp of German, even though I butcher its pronunciation, like I butcher all pronunciations, is there some kind of association there that is not clear in English? You can tell me in the show notes. Like I said, I have a pretty working grasp of reading of German. There are subtleties that a non-native speaker will have trouble with. So, the contemporary compulsions produce robs things of their endurance. Haltbarkeit, so they don't last. All right. And again, this is from the translator's note. The translator is often leaving the German word so that we can figure out associations and puns. It intentionally arose a duration in order to increase production, to force more consumption. So here we have, and this is me talking, the point of actual economy here. So one of the things that Byung-Chul Han is kind of accusing modern society of is in constantly needing to reinvent itself and encourage consumption. Ritual is actually discouraged because it's dependent on sameness, and that sameness is part of what drives it. So tradition and ritual is something that orders a community, is fought against in our political economy of consumerism. Now, consumerism always seems to me to be a limited critique of political economy. It only deals with one part of it, but I think this is an interesting point. Lingering, and that is italicized, however, presupposes that things endure. I'm reading Han again. If things are merely used up and consumed, they cannot be lingering. And at the same, the compulsion of production destabilizes life by undermining what is enduring in life. Thus, despite the fact that life expectancy is increasing, production is destroying life's endurance. It's an awfully subjective statement. A smartphone is not a thing in the Arendt sense. It lacks the very self-sameness that stabilizes life. It is also not a particularly enduring object. It differs from a thing like a table, which confronts me in its self-sameness. The content displayed on the smartphone, which demands our constant attention, is anything but self-same. The quick succession of bits of content displayed on the smartphone make any lingering impossible. Yeah, it kind of does. That's me talking again. Thus, the restlessness inherent in the apparatus makes it a non-thing. And I'm going to have to read from Non-Things and Psychopolitics because this actually does make reference to those works. So we're going to be reading more from this, but more Byung-Chul Han works are going to be incorporated because they kind of seem like a series of very long essays that inform each other. In that way, people reach there, for the smartphones is also compulsive, but the thing should not compel us in this way. Forms of ritual, such as manners, make possible both beautiful behavior amongst humans and a beautiful, gentle treatment of things. In ritual context, things are not consumed or used up, verbraucht, but used, gebraucht. I don't know why that German is important there. Thus, they also become old. Under consumption and production, by contrast, we have behaved towards things, even towards the world, as consumers rather than users. In return, they consume us. Relentless consumption surrounds us with disappearance, thus destabilizing life. Ritual practices ensure that we do not only treat not only other people, but also things in beautiful ways. As a side note, beautiful is always such a big verb. adjective. It's not one I love. We have to define beauty. Sometimes I like beauty as like aesthetic things which seem pleasing and seem to bring a promise of a better future. But that's kind of an overexpansive definition, just like Byung-Chul Han's definition of ritual. So we'll see. There are things that there are. I'm sorry, my aphasia is kicking in. That there is an affinity between us and other people as well as things. This is a long quote. Mass teaches the priest to handle things in a beautiful ways. The gentle holding of a chalice and of the host, capitalized. The slow cleaning of the receptacles, the turning of the book's pages, the result of the beautiful handling of things, the spirit lifting gaiety. And that is from Hanke. Fantasien der Wiederholung. And I'm guessing there's no English translation of that. I don't see who translated that passage. All right. One thing I'm learning about Byung-Chul Han's essays, he likes long quotes that he only attributes in the footnotes. So it's a thing. Today we consume not only things themselves, but also the emotions that are bound up with things. You cannot consume things endlessly, but emotions you can. Thus, emotions open up a new field of infinite consumption. The emotionalization of commodities and their associated aestheticization of commodities are subject to the compulsion of production. Their function is to increase consumption and production. As a consequence, the aesthetic is colonized by the economic. I think that's actually kind of brilliant. The way in which we associate consuming with experiences and experiences with the emotions surrounded by that experience, and we chase the consumptive patterns to get the experience again. Now, I'm sure that this might be somewhat of a false schema. I'm not 100% feeling great about it, but I think there's a truth there that I would be hard pressed to formalize, but want to somehow. Emotions are more fleeting than things. They, therefore, do not stabilize life. In consuming emotions, we do not relate to things, but to ourselves. What we seek is emotional authenticity. Thus, the consumption of emotions strengthens the narcissistic relationship to ourselves. The relationship to the world that we have by way of the mediation of things is therefore increasingly lost. I think that's an interesting point. Remember what Byung-Chul Han said about authenticity in the last section when I talked about it. Values today also serve as things for individual consumption. They become commodities. Values such as justice, humanity, and sustainability are exploited for a profit. Our fair trade enterprise has a slogan: change the world while drinking tea. Changing the world through consumption, that would be the end of revolution. Nowadays, one can purchase vegan shoes or clothes. Soon, there will be probably vegan smartphones too. Neoliberalism often makes use of morality for its own ends. Moral values are consumed as markers of distinction. I talk about that a lot, that we use distinction and justification in our consumption of that, virtue signaling, vice signaling, etc., as ways to distinguish ourselves, but they are ultimately part of self-branding and thus consumable and expendable. They are credited to the ego account, appreciating the value of self. They increase our narcissistic self-respect, and through values we relate not to community, but to our own egos. The symbol, the Tercera Hospitalis, seals the alliance between guest friends. The word symbolon is situated within the semantic horizon of relation, wholeness, and salvation. According to the myth related by Aristophanes in Plato's Symposium, humans were originally globular beings with two faces and four legs. Because they were so unruly, Zeus sought to weaken them by dividing them in two. Ever since their division, humans have been symbola, longing for the other half, longing for healing and wholeness. The Greek Symbolization, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that. Greek speakers, you can chastise me later. Thus means to bring together. Rituals are symbolic practices of Symbolization. In this sense, they bring people together and create an alliance, a wholeness, a community. Symbolism as a medium of community is gradually disappearing. And we're going to end there. I think there's a lot to deal with here. And I think one of the things I find interesting is as soon as I start becoming frustrated with Byung-Chul Han's looseness of categories and his assertions, I start to see its logic in ways that I often don't with other continental thinkers. You see my videos where I both praise and get very frustrated with Baudrillard, for example. There are ways in which everyday people can become fascinated with categories and also take a singular thinker as always correct. We want to warn against that here. Even your relationship with me should be mediated against that way. Not always right. Nobody is. So as we engage more with Byung-Chul Han, we're going to have to ask our questions. Where is this fuzzy? And where does it seem to be true? I find a lot of the assertions fuzzy in the particular assertion, but the broader sweep of the argument does seem to be true to me somehow. I've experienced what Byung-Chul Han's talking about, even though I can't really explain it in the same terms. And I want us to think about that as we go through parts of this. Now, of course, I can't read the whole book to you. That would be a violation of copyright ethics, and I don't want this taken down. I think long passages are within fair use, but I think, you should go and find this book and read it. I'm going to be doing a few more videos on it, but I think this will get more into what Byung-Chul Han was talking about with authenticity and the thing that I commented on the first time from chapter 2. If we go back and look at the way symbol and ritual are tied together for Byung-Chul Han as a kind of thought object, and how objects that exist for use but not for consumption are seen as ordering a large part of life, and thus rituals are kind of an objectification of social relations with symbolic meaning. All right. Well, on that, I hope you continue listening. Like and subscribe. I have a Patreon for those who want more content and want audio versions of this content, all ad-free. There's a podcast with the interviews. You can find it on Buzzsprout or any podcast catcher that you use. Hit the bell if you want more updates. I try to update a few times a week. Some days I update every day. Some days it's only 3 times a week, but you'll see. It varies depending on my day job schedule, but I do update quite a bit. You're also going to see some more branding, some things that make it easier to understand what's going on. I've already begun to relabel the categories in the playlist, so you should be able to navigate things in the past more easily. I will also link to the first episode of Byung-Chul Han in the show notes so you can find it easily. Have a great day.